there aren't a lot of artists with works owned by the Whitney Museum of American Art and who also served a dozen years in prison. But that distinction can be claimed by Anthony Papa, who got out of jail almost 2 decades ago after some real struggles, and today is a renowned and successful painter. Right now, he and some fellow artists are getting ready to present a new show titled The Museum of the War on Drugs at the United Nations, no less.
And he's an author, too. His latest book is called This Side of Freedom, Life After Clemency. And no, we're not finished. Mr. Papa is also the manager of media and artist relations at the Drug Policy Alliance. Tony Papa, welcome to BK Live.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
So you spent a dozen years behind bars, and now you're working against those drug policies that kept you there for that long. How did that marriage come together?
Well, when I received clemency from Governor George Pataki in 1994, so when I came out after serving a sentence of 12 years in a maximum security prison, Sing Sing, I wanted to save those I left behind. So I started this personal agenda to paint images of those in prison as humanistic, which is rarely done. So I went on a rescue mission, bottom line, to save those I left behind.
Tony, did you paint before?
No, I discovered my talent in prison. One day I was sitting in my cell after 3 years, picked up a mirror, looked in the mirror, saw an individual who's going to spend the most productive years of life in a cage, and I picked up a canvas and I painted this self-portrait titled 15 to Life. 7 years later, it wound up at the Whitney Museum of American Art. I got a lot of publicity on my case, and that's how I got granted executive clemency. But I discovered my talent in prison. And it's one night I was smelling this turpentine, and I followed the scent to the cell, and there was another a painter in the cell painting, and he had portraits that looked like Rembrandt, and I couldn't believe it. So he turned around, he came out, and one of the rules in prison I didn't know is that you don't look in somebody's cell. It's a sign of disrespect, and that's high on the level of existence in prison. And he wanted to fight with me, so I calmed him down. I told him, look, I admire your work. I think you're great. So then he had like a big head, and he said, oh, have you ever painted before? I said, no. Do you want to try? I said, yeah. So he gave me some watercolor, some paper, and I went in my cell overnight, painted the worst painting you ever saw, but it ignited this fire, desire to create. And that's how I became a painter.
Tony, we're seeing some stills here of some of your work. If you could tell us about some of these.
Yeah, this is all work that you see now was done while I was in prison. And basically, I talked about the experience. If you want to take a view of what a prison experience is about, you can go to my website, 15tolife.com, and see these images I made. And one of the greatest things about my discovery of my art in prison is discovering also who I was and where I sat in society. I discovered my political awareness in prison. I actually went to prison. I got 3 degrees when I went to prison. I got a master's degree from New York Theological Seminary, and I started creating these images where I feel an artist should be a social commentator, talk about the issues that affect us all. So for these paintings that you see now, these were images that I created in prison that talked about the reality that surrounded me.
So for me, 2 ironies come to mind. Number one, that you felt that sense when those bars closed that I'm going to spend the most productive years of my life in Sing Sing. And you also, at the same time, found what could be your life's mission, bringing this art as your commentary politically. And the second is that you guys are opening at the UN about the war on drugs and having all of these images and getting political with a body that doesn't have the best record when it comes to the war on drugs.
Right. Basically, what's going to happen April 19th to 21 is the show. But that week, there's going to be a bunch of stuff going on in the United Nations. The Global Commission is going to be there. And these are former heads of governments, former presidents, talking about the global war on drugs. It not only affects Americans, it's around the world. Drug users today are stigmatized. they're like communists in the McCarthy era.
Right.
People are thrown away in cages.
Yeah.
Over 1 million in the federal government. New York State, 55,000. 94% were black and Latinos in New York State.
Yeah.
Very racist laws. So these laws exist. It's still going on. President Obama now is initiating legislation to try to fix a broken criminal justice system. A mandatory minimum sentencing, crack cocaine disparity. These are all problems and issues that affected the United States of America, which actually broken the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
So we're trying to fix it. My organization I work for, Drug Policy Alliance, is the biggest advocacy organization in the United States, and we, seek to fix laws that are like these laws, mandatory minimum sentencing laws, that just are horrible. Somebody could go to prison for $10 worth of cocaine for 10 years, 15 years. So we're trying to fix those laws, and we're trying to say, if somebody puts some substance in their body, they shouldn't be penalized criminally. I think drug addiction is a medical problem, not a criminal problem. But the way it's being treated is criminally.
Tony, what can we expect to see at the museum?
Well, you're going to have art installations by other artists. Some of my paintings will be there. The painting on display now is my famous painting, 15 to Life, which was at the Whitney Museum displayed, showing the reality, the despair of spending a significant time of your life in a maximum security prison. So you're going to see images. There's going to be actually cells built, just paintings and just objects that reflect the reality of the war on drugs at the art exhibit.
So leaving Sing Sing, how do you begin to navigate the art world? You talked about some of the personalities inside, and I can only imagine some of the personalities outside dealing with those.
It has not been easy.
Yeah.
But what I do is I show my work a lot of spaces, cultural spaces around leading galleries, wherever I could. My objective is not really to sell my art. Well, it was nice to sell a piece, but to get the word out about the war on drugs and what it means for people to be imprisoned for small amounts of drugs and get whacked with tremendous sentences. So my art goes along with my advocacy for telling people what the drug war is about and who it affects.
Right, what it actually does, what it actually looks like, and humanizes it. Tony, there's also the book coming out, right? So it's already available as an e-reader. It comes out next week in print. This Side of Freedom, Life After Clemency. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's another memoir. My first memoir was 15 to Life, How I Painted My Way to Freedom. Feral House. That was published in 2004, and that was about my prison experience. This book is a book about my 18 years of freedom and how I've done what I've done to survive, because almost 70% of those that come out return within 3 years. So my whole objective is to talk about my experience and to show how I survived outside and was one of the few that made it and created, who I am today. Tony Papa, the artist, the author.
Well, Tony Papa, the artist, the author, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks so much.
Bringing your work by. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.